Okay, all right. I need to present. Okay. All right, now, so what the first slide, this was the last, don't write this down because this was the last slide that we covered on Thursday. Usually if we're in the middle, we have a part one and part two. I'll usually start at the last slide that we're kind of covering. So don't write this down from the notes that I gave you guys today. Everybody should have got the guided notes this morning. All right. So what we had essentially kind of section 2 was talking about was a little bit of kind of history in the kind of populating of America. And we talked about kind of colonization prior to kind of independence, if you will. But again, the United States is often referred to as a nation of immigrants, all right, because immigration played a big role in not just populating this country, but also building the foundation for an industrialized nation, which kind of later in the 20th century develops the United States as kind of a major economic power, all right. And so in the kind of we talked about the first and second waves of immigration after American independence. There's a difference, and you'll have a few questions on the test that are pertaining to that. The first wave we had talked about was primarily from Northern and Western Europe, primarily Protestant in religion, which religion was a kind of a major kind of identifying factor. All right, with the exception of the Irish, who were majority, not all, but majority of them were Catholics, Roman Catholics. And always here we find that as we start to see an influx of new people, there's always a little bit of a pushback there. When we get into the second wave, we see more immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, from Asia, from Latin America. All right. It was during that time we encouraged immigration, all right, from these places because we needed cheap labor, right? And unfortunately, in many cases, sometimes you find a little bit of a pushback with that. People that aren't always accepting and welcoming. We see the rise of what they call nativism. There was a kind of a party called the American Party, which was often referred to as the Know Nothings. If you ever seen the movie Gangs in New York, there's a character named Bill the Butcher, who's a major kind of based on a character in New York City who was a kind of a major member of the Know Nothing Party. All right. And so eventually we start to see a limitation on immigration. We had talked about something called the Chinese Exclusionary Act in the 1880s, which focused on limiting immigration from Asia, particularly China, later Japan. And then these quota acts that we would see where we put a quota limit on immigration based on the kind of total number of people from a particular country. All right. The first one was in 1921, and then the kind of like added on to that was the Immigration Act of 24 here, which was the last slide that we talked about on Thursday, right? So that limited the number of immigrants coming from particular countries, like 2% based on the census, how many people were from Italy, how many people from Germany, how many people were from Ireland, and so on and so forth, based on the 1890 census, the count there. So that tried to limit that. And it does here for much of the 1920s, we see a dip in immigration coming from particularly Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia. This here is a image of Calvin Coolidge, who was president at the time, signing the Immigration Act of 24. The guy, like I was telling you, over to his right shoulder is John J. Pershing, who led the American forces in World War I just 6 years prior to this. So this would basically kind of gives a sense of legitimacy here to this act. All right. But this is where we start to see kind of the Republican Party in the 1920s kind of trying to limit immigration, if you will. All right. And again, pie graphs, everybody loves pie graphs, is showing you essentially from Northern, Western Europe and Southern and Eastern Europe, we see by 1931 and 40, we see that number of those coming from Southern and Eastern Europe diminishing a bit. All right. Now, much of the kind of current immigration policy that we have today is based on an act that was passed in 1990 that was signed by George H.W. Bush. It was the big proponent was Teddy Kennedy, who's a senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy's brother. that kind of sets the annual quota of immigrants at 675,000. It moved up to 700,000 at one point in the late 90s. All right. This act has been kind of there have been kind of addendums that have been added to this. The current administration is trying to kind of chip away at some of these here. This is primarily dealing with immigration, what we call legal immigration, if you will. All right, people filing for kind of like refugee status and stuff like that. So this act is being tweaked periodically, kind of throughout the years, but particularly the current Trump administration is trying to kind of lower this number even more so. The exact numbers I'm not totally sure offhand, but this is essentially what would kind of like sets the kind of it kind of did away with the kind of quota based on nation states for a bit there. All right, the kind of preferences here, and there's a big emphasis on kind of keeping families together. All right, so you would have to apply for the Immigration Act in 1990 to apply for residency in the United States. There was the first emphasis was on family. So husbands, wives, and children of U.S. citizens were given preferential treatment first. All right. In the sense that it's like if you were married to an American citizen, you were under this act, you could apply for citizenship within 3 years, I believe. All right. Those with valuable job skills also kind of like can move to the top of the line there. With that, they're talking to anybody who has like kind of doctors. Primarily we see a lot of doctors coming from other countries during this time. And then what we classify, and it's kind of an antiquated kind of term, but they call aliens. These are permanent residents of the U.S. who are still citizens of another country, and so they would be given this opportunity to apply for citizenship. All right. However, this is a little tricky. All right, because it wasn't always guaranteeing that you were able to apply there. All right. This is, we see the emphasis on kind of like if you were a holder of a green card, as it goes, which allowed citizens from another country to work in the United States. All right, this would give you opportunity to stay here and then apply for citizenship. All right, and so this, like I said, this act is being kind of challenged by the Trump administration. All right. However, we as a nation of immigrants, we do have people that come here who don't necessarily meet these criteria. All right. In many cases here, we're kind of trying to become a U.S. citizen that kind of falls under this kind of idea of the kind of Immigration Act in 1990 is you have two classifications: native born, being born in the U.S. if one or both your parents are citizens, and then what we call the naturalization process, which is the process which somebody who is an alien or somebody who is kind of a permanent resident but a citizen of another country can apply for citizenship. Naturalized citizenship, the process to go through that is similar to what you guys are going through today. You pass a constitution test. All right. And then also with the one in 1990, if you were able to kind of have a kind of decent knowledge of English or American history and stuff like that, that played a role in kind of preferential treatment, if you will. Every 4th of July, there's a kind of a major ceremony for naturalization for those who are from other countries that are applying to become U.S. citizens. All right. During the Republican National Convention, President Trump naturalized, I think there's 6 people from various countries that finally got their they were sworn in as U.S. citizens. All right. So that's essentially you're a naturalized citizen. You're, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger or, somebody like Tom Cruise or thing who come from another country. They go through the naturalization process. All right. And then those who are born to U.S. citizens, even if you're born, that's on a military base overseas or whatever, your parents, one or both, are U.S. citizens, and you are technically a U.S. citizen. All right. However, what we see here with kind of immigration, you find people that are coming to this country for various push and pull factors. I was mentioning that kind of pull factors are things that kind of kind of attract people to this country. Push factors are kind of what kind of force people out of their countries. All right. And so if you're fleeing for kind of political purposes, you were usually given preferential treatment. You're not subject to quota policies. So if you were basically kind of had to leave your country because of your political stance, right, you find a number of people that were fleeing, like during the Cold War, were fleeing places that were controlled by communism, that were given political refugee status. However, economic refugees is a little bit difficult. All right, they're like currently in Central America, there's places like Guatemala, all right, where people are or El Salvador that are escaping things like gang violence or just abject poverty to come to the United States. All right. Unfortunately, the kind of concept of a kind of economic refugee is something that that is a little harder to kind of obtain a kind of residency status here. All right. And that's where a lot of the issue here with immigration is being played out politically. All right. So there's essentially refugees is usually when they target anybody be classified a refugee leaving for various reasons, but political refugees are the ones who are given a little bit more preferential treatment and status. All right. An attempt to try to kind of deal with kind of what we call economic refugees, or in many cases, those who they call legal immigration, was an act that was passed in '86, some 4 years before the current Immigration Act that kind of pertains to legal immigration, something called the Immigration Reform and Control Act, often referred to as the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which was named after the two senators that co-sponsored the act. This was an attempt to try to kind of reduce the flow of legal immigration by kind of giving what we call undocumented residents, those who didn't fit the criteria, hadn't have a green card, did not fit the criteria of political refugees, an opportunity if they had met certain requirements to kind of gain the concept of kind of citizenship. All right. Sometimes they refer to the term a pathway to citizenship. Now, this was signed by Ronald Reagan. All right. And so at this time here, really immigration wasn't necessarily a kind of a political football like it is today. All right. And so if you met certain criteria like knowledge of English, if you've been here kind of proving that you didn't have, let's say, a kind of like a criminal record and things of that nature, you were given the opportunity to get a green card and eventually become a U.S. citizen. All right. And so hardline immigration hawks would kind of, today they would kind of view Ronald Reagan as someone who was kind of like maybe not as strong on immigration as the current Republican Party is, but this was an attempt to try to bring people out of the shadows, as they would say. All right. And this has been, that was the last real major legislation that was kind of dealing with the issue of kind of like undocumented immigrants. All right. Until about 8 years ago. All right. When there was an executive order here signed by President Obama that is somewhat controversial, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, often referred to as DACA, which allowed for initially children who were brought to the United States when their parents came over undocumented to apply for citizenship to get all the essentially the kind of rewards that citizenship would provide. All right, they're referred to in many cases as dreamers. And so a lot of the dreamers are in their 20s and their early 30s here. All right, about 800,000 kind of applied for this position, for this status. Now, this was basically during an election year in 2012. President Obama wasn't able really, the legislation in Congress was kind of at a stalemate here. And so he kind of took it upon himself to have an executive order. Now, President Trump, like everything that kind of Obama has done, has tried to kind of essentially kind of reverse this and rescind this. And there's a case, I believe, that's coming up in the Supreme Court that is going to deal with this in the near future. He's attempted to get rid of it in kind of courts and have kind of intervened to maintain aspects of this. All right. I'm going to play this video before we go here, that does a good job at kind of explaining and kind of simplifying DACA here for you. It's just a short one. It's about 5 minutes. It's from Vox. All right. I need to mute my mic. So hold on here.
I remember the day that I found out I was undocumented. I got a call from an admissions office from a university that I had applied to. They wanted to see a green card. I, was extremely embarrassed. My mother just started crying. In between her tears, she just started apologizing and told me that it was her fault and that she wanted a better future for us, and look at what happened.
That's Juan Escalante. When he was 11 years old, Juan and his family came to the United States from Venezuela, where life had become dangerous.
We were driving, and we stopped at a red light, and a man approaches the car, and he tells my mother if she doesn't surrender the car to him, he is going to pull out a gun and kill one of her kids in the car right there. We picked up everything, we sold all our toys, and just embarked on this journey.
Juan made it to college and graduated. But because he was undocumented, he couldn't work, and he worried about being deported.
You mean like a trip to the grocery store, and you get pulled over, and that's it, it's game over.
But that changed in June of 2012.
Effective immediately, the Department of Homeland Security is taking steps to lift the shadow of deportation from these young people.
If you'd come to the U.S. when you were under 16, if you were either in high school or had a high school diploma, and if you had either no criminal record or like a teeny tiny misdemeanor,
then you could apply for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program. Basically, a permit that protects you from getting deported and allows you to work legally in the U.S. Juan got this protection, and so did nearly 800,000 others who applied. But now, that protection is gone.
I'm here today to announce that the program known as DACA that was effectuated under the Obama administration is being rescinded.
DACA was designed to protect a generation of young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers, named after a bill called the DREAM Act, which had been floating around Congress for more than a decade, and with bipartisan support. The bill would have given unauthorized immigrants who grew up in the U.S. a way to gain legal status and eventually apply for citizenship. And even though it fell short of 60 Senate votes in 2010, the idea was still popular with the American public.
when President Obama announced DACA, it was in the middle of the 2012 presidential campaign, but it didn't turn into a huge campaign issue because Republicans were really ambivalent about turning immigration into a wedge issue.
We need to help accommodate these kids who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in this legal limbo.
We cannot forever have children who were brought here by their parents when they were small children to live in the shadows.
But in 2014, Obama proposed making older immigrants eligible for DACA and creating similar protections against deportation for undocumented parents with children who were U.S. citizens.
And a lot of Republicans said, whoa, that's too far.
These new actions would have protected about 4.5 million people, nearly half the estimated undocumented population. A group of 26 states sued the Obama administration over the expansion, and they won. A federal judge stopped the DACA expansions from going into effect, hinting that they were probably unconstitutional.
People had started thinking back to, well, if those bigger programs were unconstitutional, what does that say about this DACA program that's already in place?
Then came Donald Trump.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Once Donald Trump became the leading Republican presidential candidate running on an immigration hardline platform, Republicans started to look at things in a new light.
If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even be talking about illegal immigration.
When Trump won, DACA's fate seemed sealed. But even though he revoked lots of Obama's other executive orders on immigration, nearly 8 months into his term, he still hadn't ended DACA.
A lot of the immigration hawks began to go, wait, we were promised that you were going to get rid of this amnesty that exists right now. What the heck happened?
So a bunch of states threatened to sue the government over DACA again if Trump didn't get rid of it, which brings us to early September 2017.
It is my duty to ensure that the laws of the United States are enforced and that the constitutional order is upheld.
It's a very stark message that leaves a whole lot of people who only consider themselves to be Americans in limbo for the next several months.
In the 5 years it's been around, DACA has had a big impact on young undocumented immigrants. A survey of DACA recipients found nearly 70% got a job with better pay. More than 60% opened their first bank account. Nearly 65% bought their first car, and a similar share say that they've pursued educational opportunities they previously couldn't. But when these protections expire over the coming weeks, months, or years, they'll be back where they started before 2012, unable to work legally and constantly at risk for deportation.
Okay. So let's see. All right. So that was, oops, I'm going back here too much. All right. So let me, all right. Was that okay? Was I going too fast for you guys?
No,
Somebody?
I got it all.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
all the slides too.
Okay. Like I said, I'll post it on Google Classroom today. So if you need to go back on anything, does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't get the last answer.
You didn't get the last one? Okay. Let me
No.
go back. We're still recording. So let's see, go back. That one?
No, I got that one. It was the one that was in quotes.
Oh, Dreamers.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Dreamers. It was named after an act. They kind of like use the kind of acronyms for that. So a lot of those that are kind of applying for DACA, they refer to them as Dreamers. Like I said, this is constantly in the courts. There's a big Supreme Court case that's coming up here. So this election has some consequences as well for those about those 800,000 people. So depending on who wins this election, it may determine whether they get to stay or they kind of have to be forcefully kind of like deported. So it'll be kind of interesting here. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send out tomorrow another news ELA article on DACA here. It's on one of the court cases, and then Thursday we're gonna finish up the chapter on notes there. All right. My plan is to test next week. So we're going to find out this week if we're coming back remotely or not. So that's going to, when we have the test, is all going to be dependent on that. Okay. All right. So if you don't have any questions or concerns, you can get ready for your second hour class. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.